teach this morning. I've been just praying this week to the Lord to guide us on what to say in these times we live in, and how to bring this lesson in a way we can understand it, in a way that can give us fruitfulness. My prayers every time I stand behind this pulpit to teach Sunday school is to give something that you can take a hold of, get that gold nugget, to take home with you, carry on. I can tell you when we were younger, when our teenage years, Sister Marie was our Sunday school teacher, and she's a great woman. And I can tell you times that Jenna and Ashley and some of the other ones were in there, and I can tell you the Sunday school lessons we had that I still carry on today, that I still use in our lives. And every time I get up here to teach Sunday school where somebody asks me to do it, I said, Lord, just let me say something that somebody can take home with them, somebody to change your life maybe a little bit. And we don't know who's on the air this morning, but if you're on the way back from PFIC or you're joining, I hope this is encouraging. And the ones here in church this morning, I hope this is encouraging to you. I was reading over this, and it was encouraging to me to change some of my things in my life. But as we jump into today's lesson 5, it says murmuring and complaining. And the theme of today's lesson, as we follow the history of Israel, we can learn many important lessons. We will find things that we should imitate and things we should avoid. So before we get into today's lesson, I'm going to set the scene of where we're actually at, and last week it was in chapter 7, I think it was, if I'm not bad mistaken. And so at this point, it goes to 7 and 12. At this point, before last week, they had not gotten to the Red Sea. So now we're at the Red Sea in chapter 14. And this is where I want to start, is chapter 14, verse 12 in Exodus. And it says, Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve Egyptians? For it has been better for us to serve Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which was showed to you this day. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them no more forever. And the Lord shall fight for you, and he shall hold your peace. And you skip down to verse 21 in chapter 14, it says, And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. In verse 22 it says, And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall into their right hand and into their left. So before we can get into this, we need to realize where the Israelites are at in chapter 15. So we go back to chapter 14. So they're at this point where they're going to cross the Red Sea. We all know the story. If we've been in church long enough, we know that they're up to, they've been let out of Egypt, and then Pharaoh's army's after them, and they're at this point at the Red Sea, and they don't know where to go. They don't know where they're going to turn. They get to this big body of water. It's like if you go down to the beach, and there's the beach. What do? And he's got these thousands and thousands of people, and I actually did some research, and it was around almost 2 million people if you count men, women, children, and whoever else they had. It's about 2 million people. And they're at this point in their life where they don't know where to go. And what is the first thing they do? They complain. They said, Is it not the word that we did? Is it not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt? Say it, Let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. Then we should die in the wilderness. They complained about the point before they even got across the Red Sea, of that we're here at this point in our life, and why are we here? Why are we at this point? Why is it that you saved us from bondage, and we're here, and we're at the Red Sea, and we have nowhere to go? So, in states in chapter 12, it says, like I said, it says they're complaining, and it said, I'd rather be captured or killed. You ever gotten a point in your life where you say, I just want to give up, I'd rather be captured or killed? I haven't. I've never been at a point where I've been pressed that hard. I said, I've been set free out of bondage, and I've never been a prisoner per se in real life. That I'm just like, I just got to get away. I just got to break free, and then I'm ready to go back to it. They hit one hard thing that they think is the worst thing, and then there's no way out in their eyes. And they ask, and it says in that verse, in verse 12, they said, it's better for us to just be captured by the Egyptians. It's better for us to just, give up. And then we see that there's times in our lives, Satan may come to you and say, He set you free, maybe, but don't you just want to give up? Maybe you get this trial in your life, and you just want to give up, or you just want to you're at this point where there's no return, and then the devil comes knocking on your door and say, hey, don't you just give up right now? There's no need going further, and this is the biggest trial you're ever going to face. There's no need going, I can give you more than what you ever wanted. The devil does that sometimes in our spiritual realms of our lives. But then, if you keep on going down to verse 21, we see that the Red Sea is split. What I found interesting about verse 21, and I'm going to read it again, it says that Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back in a strong wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. I've read the story probably 100 times, and this never stood out to me until I read it the other night. That said, he stretched out his hand, and the Lord caused the sea to go back in a strong wind, or by a strong east wind all that night. And it struck me hard, Brother Mark, that, sometimes in our lives we're faced with this trial and tribulation, and then night comes. And we wonder, well, God, why? And then we start complaining, why are we here? There's nothing in the morning. We're going to wake up, and the Egyptians are going to be there, and I don't know what we're going to do, and they're just Pharaoh's armies on our back, and we're here. And I can just imagine like people were talking among themselves and then going up to the leaders and saying, like, what are we going to do? But then it struck me when I read that it said that at night he blew the winds. Sometimes in our darkest times, God moves even in our darkest times, even in the night of our life. He moves when we can't see exactly what he's doing. And I thought about that. I thought about, did they hear the water move? Did they see it? It's at night. They can't. At this point in my life, I would think that it's just a moon, and they may see a glance, and it's just darkness. If you ever go to the beach and you look out, it's just darkness. All you see is the moon and the stars when you're looking at the water. All you can hear is the water moving. Sometimes in life, when it gets dark, all we can do is hear the water moving in our lives. All you can hear is the water, the walls coming up, where you can walk on dry ground. Sometimes we can't see it at that point, but God is always working at that point. And like I said, this is not in our lesson, but I just want to get you an idea of where we're at before we get in this lesson. And I did a little research on the Red Sea, and have you ever thought about how long it would take for the Israelites to cross the Red Sea? Just an idea. So the Red Sea at its widest point is 190 miles wide. And at its deepest point is 9,970 feet deep. That's 1.88 miles deep. At the point that we believe that Moses had crossed, it was only 14 or 15 miles wide. So if you keep digging, I believe it took the Israelites about 6 hours to cross the Red Sea. It's estimated there's around 2 million people that went around the Israelites that crossed it. This means they did not walk in a single file line. This means they walked as a larger group that followed along. And that's at the calculation of a pace of what somebody walks in a mile on a daily basis, what they could withstand. Every one of the Israelites made it out without being muddy, wet, or left behind. There was not a single one of them left behind. It was on dry ground. As Christians, we are worried about the details on how we're going to make it through, and what we're going to go through, and how we're going to make it. But if God can defy gravity, and can make a dry place to the Red Sea, then what can he do in the middle of our situations? What can he do in the sense of our situations? And then you got to remember, in all this time, they're complaining about where they're at. Think about your life. When you get to that point, I just don't know how we're going to make it. And God goes, I'm going to open up your Red Sea, and you're going to walk across of it. Not that you're going to walk across and your feet's going to get muddy, that you're going to wade across it, or that I'm going to provide a raft, or I'm going to provide a way. I'm going to not just take you around it, I'm going to take you through it. I'm going to take you through the situation in life that is so deep that you cannot withstand it. And I thought about it, if this is 1.8 miles deep in some parts, and if some of y'all have ever been to the beach and you walk out, it gets a little deeper, and then you may hit that trench and it goes back up. That's how it is in life. We have our ups and downs through this time. It wasn't a flat surface in my mind that these Israelites walked. It was a path. It was ups and downs. And I said, like I calculated, if it took 6 hours, there were people saying, I want to stop and rest. I'm tired of walking this way. I'm tired of walking in this. The murmuring, the complaining did not stop. I don't believe it. There's always one in every crowd that has to say something negative about a situation. Sometimes, if you go in a situation, there's always one in a group that says, if it rained, well, it didn't rain enough, or it rained too much, or it's sunny today, but it's too hot. There's always somebody that's going to say something negative. And that's what this lesson is about today, is about complaining about the situations that we're in. Complaining about why we are where we are. But it's amazing to me how they complained about giving up to the Egyptians. But all it took is one night of the wind blowing and 6 hours of walking on dry ground in the middle of the ocean for them. In chapter 15 to start out, it says, Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he had trumpeted gloriously the horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. It didn't take much for them to change their attitude in some of them. It went from, we're not going to make it through this and I'm ready to give up, to, I just walked across the Red Sea and look behind you and it's following behind them and takes up the whole army. It's amazing to me how their attitude changed. When it was good, they're praising him. When it's bad, they're complaining about it. So as we get today's lesson, it talks about, in chapter 15, we'll read the scripture, it says in 22, So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and he went out into the wilderness of Sur, and they were there 3 days in the wilderness, and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter, and therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which he had cast into the waters. And the waters were made sweet, and he made for them a statute and an ordinance. And there he proved them. And he said, If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and wilt give an ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon the tree, which I have brought unto the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. So we're at this point in chapter 15 that they've gotten through, they come across the Red Sea, and it's been 3 days. So we went through leaving the Egyptians to crossing the Red Sea, and 3 days later, they're the same people that they were before they crossed the Red Sea. Where's our water, Moses? Where's it at? We're in the middle of the wilderness. Where's my water? All it took was 3 days. I was thinking about this, and I may be wrong, but I was thinking about my life when I was thinking about this. How many times have we come to Sunday morning service and we get a blessing, and we're like, I'm going to run to victory. I got what I needed. And then by Wednesday, you're at work, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to make it. I'm so beat down. The devil's got me on my back, and I just don't know how I'm going to make it. Or, man, that person hurt my feelings, and then you get bitterness 3 days later, and the Lord gave you a great victory Sunday morning or come by in a mighty way. All it takes is 3 days for the situation to change, and some people start complaining about it. But it says in the bitterness was made sweet. As often the case is, after such deliverance, Israel found themselves entering the wilderness. We should know by now that the mountaintop experience with its grand and glorious feeling does not last forever. Israel now began the rough part of their journey in the actual living of the daily life. Here there was once a little shade, is now hot and dusty, and there's no water. We'll all spend some time in our lives in the wilderness. The wilderness of the everyday battles with Satan, the wilderness of our everyday difficulties that arise, the wilderness of our everyday needs that we experience, and the wilderness of our spiritual dry spells where there seems to be no water. Even the Apostle Paul said that he suffered a perilous in the wilderness. And then they get to the point where it's like, well, they found the water, but it's bitter. They found it, but it doesn't work. They found it, but there has to be a remedy. There has to be something that changes, something that moves a little different. And maybe this is what I thought about was that he stated in verse, verse 26, it said, I will put none of these diseases upon you which I have brought unto the Egyptians. That stood out to me in this point because he said, we're going to put the tree in there and it's going to make it bitter to sweet. But I'm not going to put any diseases that I did in the Egyptians. At this point it was that I'm not going to treat it the same way I would for where you came from, but it's going to be different to where you are now. Something has changed in the fact of where they're at, that we got in a different mindset. We can't think that well. if I put this tree in, are we going to suffer like the Egyptians do? Am I going to be in the same place I was before we got to the Red Sea and was in bondage? Am I going to get those diseases? And the Lord said, I will not give these upon thee. So then we get to the point that it's made sweet, and we go to verse 27, and then we get to the point where we're at the oasis. And it says there were 12 wells and 70 palms. And it says, after they have gone through the hot and dry wilderness, and they had seen the bitter waters made sweet, they traveled on and reached a refreshing oasis. Oh, the joy of finding an oasis after life's wilderness is experienced. So at this time, they've been going through the wilderness, and they got their drink, and now they go to the oasis. And there's time in our life where we walk through our spiritual wilderness, and the first times we go through sometimes in the actual physical wilderness, in the desert, you can experience heat stroke or, things like that. And the first signs of heat stroke are dizziness and lightheadedness, weakness in muscles or cramps, and behavioral changes such as confusion, disorientation, and stagnance. And I thought about it, if we apply that to our spiritual lives and we get through the places in the wilderness and we get heat stroke, dizziness and lightheadedness, we can't walk straight. Muscle cramping and weakness, we're not as strong as we used to be. And behavioral changes, maybe you changed the way that you started walking, the people you started hanging around, the way you handle situations, the attitude of the situation. Disorientation is a side effect that we hear about in people in the wilderness, and sometimes it indicates where people see mirages. And I thought about this, is that when these Israelites have been in the heat for all these days and they're tired, they're wore out, and probably some of them experienced heat stroke. When they saw that oasis, was it a mirage or was it a real oasis? Yeah. Was it a place that they could find comfort in, or was it a place that it was like every other time and all it was sand? The definition of a mirage is an illusion caused by the atmospheric conditions, especially the appearance of the sheet of water in the desert. At these times that we live in, the devil tries itself to set up mirages in our lives, that we believe the answer is just what he says it is. And these times the devil may show us a mirage that's an oasis that we can go and rest in, but in reality it will destroy us. And I thought about it, the devil set up a mirage as well, this situation that you're in, and says, everybody else is doing it, it'll be fine, or you can slack up here, you can go back and nobody will know you did this, or you can slack up and there's no way that anybody can tell it, or that you'll be as strong as you were. Just a little bit convincing is that mirage. Just think about it in your spiritual life, that you've been there and you've been fighting, and then all of a sudden the devil comes along and says, man, I know you've been fighting, but you can just quit a little bit right a second, get your breath, here's you some water. I got you this oasis, if there's this mirage the devil shows you, say you can rest here for a little while. Get off the trail a little bit, take a left here or a right, and you can sit here and just wait a little bit, and it'll all be fine. And then you waited too long, and there's really no water there. But in John 4:13-14 it says, whoever drinketh of the water shall thirst again, but whosoever drinketh the water that I give shall never thirst. But the waters that I give shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up in everlasting life. The difference between the waters that the devil gives and the water that God gives is that God's gift never stops giving. Right. It's a refreshing, it's something that they can hold on to, it's something we can hold on to. That, the times that, how do you know if it's a mirage or not? How do you know if it's something that is better than what it was, or that you just have to trust? Walk a little further. If you walk a little further, that mirage generally will go away. Most of the time, when you get it in the view, it's not what it cracked up to be. In our spiritual life, it may be a situation or a group of friends or a job opportunity or something that comes awry and it's there, and you're just like, it's beautiful because you're heat stroking, you're wore down, you're not, as I said, your dizziness and lightheaded, your muscle weakness, your behavior has already changed, and you see that. And you identify that that's something that's there, but it's really not. The devil has skewed you to that point. So, when we're reading this, think about the Israelites in that situation. Is that, are they believing it's really an oasis? I mean, they crossed the Red Sea. They got to the water and it was bitter and they made it sweet, and now they're thirsty again. And so in Isaiah 35:6 it says, "In the wilderness shall waters break out the streams of desert." And Peter in Acts 3 spoke of times of refreshing that will come in the presence of the Lord. And it says it's interesting that in this chapter it states that there are 70 palm trees and 12 wells. And the psalmist stated, "In the days of the years of 70, so there's a palm tree for every year of your life." And it says there are 12 wells, so there's 12 months in a year. So there's a refreshing every month that you need. But like I said in John 4:13-14, you can have a refreshing every day. And there's no limit to where the well runs dry. And sometimes in our lives, and some of y'all know I work in the engineering field and we design wells sometimes, and when you're digging a well, a lot of people believe that when you hit water, you just stop. You just stop at the surface. No, you dig a little deeper till you get to the core of the water, and you put a steel casing around your pipe so it doesn't get contaminated or falls in or stuff like that. Sometimes these churches, these bigger churches that give you the glam and the glory, they just dig a little deeper, just enough to hit water, but never get the full experience. There's Christians that we know that they only dig to the point where they get a little water and a little refreshing, but they don't ever stabilize the well for it to be everlasting. And this is how it is in this oasis. I have to believe that these wells were deep enough, Brother Matt, that when they got in there, it didn't matter if all the Israelites came through, there was enough water for the next ones behind them. Because they were put there for a reason. They were built. Somebody constructed that well at that point knowingly that somebody was going to come by for refreshing. Somebody was going to come by. And that's how Jesus is in our life, is that he comes in and he digs that well. But you're the one to tell them where to stop. You're the one to tell them, do we want to dig a little deeper? Or do we want to stop at just the surface level and say, I got enough right now and I'm not going to save none up. And that's what happens in these cities is that they have a well, they dig it, they drill it out, and they pump it to a water tower. And it sits there and it populates for the whole city. Same way in spiritual life. When you dig it, are you just digging enough to satisfy you, or are you digging enough to satisfy your water tank in your life? Are you digging enough that you can hold you through the dry times? To hold you through the situations of wondering if you're going to make it or not? Because it matters only to you how long you take and how deep you get in your experience. There's no limit to God. There's no limit to how much you can be blessed. There's no limit to how much you can get out of your spiritual situation. It's all up to how you face it. And so I was thinking, there was 12 wells. Would it be enough? There's 2 million people, as I calculated earlier. Would that be enough water? Will that be enough? One of my favorite Bible scriptures, and it's helped me along the way in some difficult times, is Ephesians 3:20. It says, "Now to him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we can ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us." What I thought about is that in our situations, and we wonder about is our experience going to be enough? Is it going to be, when we're going through these situations? Just remember that he's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we can think or ask. More than we can ever imagine, more than we can ever think about, more than we can ever picture in our mind. We didn't read here in any of these scriptures where Moses was like, I'm going to bring them to this well and let them drink, and they're already complaining again, but is it going to be enough water? Because I can imagine there's probably a young man in the back and he's probably like, well, is there going to be enough water for me? Is there going to be enough water for my family? Is there going to be enough to feed my cattle, to feed my livestock? Because if you read over in 16, they had livestock they took with them. Is it enough that they're going to feed or drink for the rest of the crew, for my whole family in their house? But it never stated that anyone went away thirsty. It never stated that they weren't, filled with that refreshingness. It never stated that they lacked in this situation. So not only does God provide water in the wilderness, but as we go on, they provide manna and quail. The Israelites were, and it gets into this, and the Israelites were instructed every morning from their home to collect manna. Can you imagine that, and on the 6th day they got double. Can you imagine walking outside and we're close enough to Thomasville, and we all know what Flower Bakery is, or most of us do. And we get outside, and here's a better example. Texas Roadhouse has those honey rolls. And it describes manna as a honey sensational roll, a sweet bread. Can you imagine waking up one morning and saying, hey, all right, Brandon, go out here and collect you all them Texas Roadhouse rolls, and we're going to eat for the next day. And then tomorrow's going to be hot and fresh again. It may not have been hot, but in my mind, I like to think it was hot, and they had some honey butter on the side. And anyway, I'm a fat guy, so it's okay. But imagine that. You wake up in the morning, you're wondering, all right, we went through the wilderness, and we went to the Red Sea, and we don't have no food. And at this point, they're like, we got some water now, but now I'm hungry. I mean, at this point, I can imagine Moses being a dad and being like, man, my kids are complaining about every little thing. Like, I have given them water, and they're still complaining. I've given them a place to sleep, and they're still complaining. And they ain't complained about sleeping on the ground yet. I wonder if they would have if they got beds. But anyway, so they're at this point, and then it's like, all right, so now we're waking up every morning, there's manna on the ground. There's Texas Roadhouse rolls on the ground. But you can only pick up enough for today, and tomorrow we're going to give you some more. And then tomorrow we're going to give you some more. But on the sixth day, you're going to take double. And then there came a spot where some of them didn't get enough. Some of them believed on the seventh day there would be some on the ground. That's how it is in our lives. Sometimes we get blessed and blessed and blessed, and the next time we go to the field, there's nothing there. When God speaks to us in a service like we've been having lately, He's like, if you'd have stepped out Sunday night, I could have given you a double blessing of what you would have had Monday for Sunday morning. But you didn't act on it. You didn't pursue it. What happened in this situation was that the Israelites went out and they gathered Monday through Saturday, in my sense, that enough just for the day. But on Saturday they got double. But that bread never went stale. It never went bad. And that's how it is with God, is that every time you go back, it's the same every time. It's the same refreshing, the same feeling, the same experience that you feel you can get that. But the thing is that you have to get enough to satisfy yourself. It's only up to you to get as much as you want. And that's how we are sometimes, is that we don't get enough of what we want. Or we feel like we get enough that we need and we go hungry. And that's what happened to some of these Israelites. They didn't get enough that they needed, so they went hungry on the seventh day. Don't be caught like the Israelites to go hungry. And, and I was thinking about this, and they ate that manna for 40 years. Can you imagine how much they complained about that? I mean, let's just be realistic. They complained about the Pharaoh's army following them through the desert to get to the Red Sea, and God gave them deliverance of that, and then they complained about the water in the wilderness, and they complained about that, and they complained about, the way probably Moses was leading them, and probably complained about, here we are at this oasis, and I got to wait my turn, and here we are, and not the fact of, I've been set free, I've been delivered, I will not thirst, and now I'm fed. It's all about the mindset of where you're at in your situation. And like I said at the beginning, there's always somebody, and I've told you, there's somebody in every group that's always negative about something. And when I say that, your mind goes to that person right then. And you think about it, I don't want to be like that person.
Right.
You don't want to be that person. But sometimes we're caught on guard about the situations in life that we become that person. And we forget to realize that there's manna falling from heaven, and there's quail, and there's water, and we're not in bondage. What just amazes me about the situation of the Israelites that we've learned about tons of times over the years is that they would have rather been in bondage than have spent 40 years in the wilderness. They would have rather been whipped and pushed to their limits and lived in a place of slavery and under our master than have the ability to say what they felt they wanted to say. They had the ability to say, where's the water at? Where's the food at? Why are we here? Where do we go next? Instead, they would have been in slavery. They'd been, all right, we're going to build these pyramids, and you're going to be quiet if not, I'm going to whip you. I mean, that's the extreme that they believe they would have been better off under Pharaoh's rule. How many times as Christians that you're like, God, you come by and you bless me, and it's just, I'm still beat down about the situation. Or, God, I don't know how I'm going to make it through this, but he took you to the last battle, but you seem to have forgot about it, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through it. And then you get this point in your mind, you're like, I'm just tired of this. I'm just tired, I'm just wore out, I've been walking through this dry place in your life, and I'm tired of where we're at. And then you start complaining about the situations, and then you get cold and indifferent, and you want to turn back to Egypt. There's no need turning back. There's no need turning your back on where we were, or what you did. But I was thinking about in these 40 years there in the wilderness, that they just wandered around the wilderness. They just walked in the desert for 40 years. Just walked around. I mean, they didn't see any, it's just desert. It's like if you go out to Utah or Texas, some parts of Texas and Arizona, it's just, if you've ever been out, it's a beautiful country. But we went in July and we hiked out there, and it was 103 degrees, I think is what it was. And I mean, the humidity's not as bad. It's a beautiful place, but you get tired of seeing the sand and desert and the heat, and you're just like, I just want another drink of water. And I can see where these Israelites are at when they get thirsty, because I've been there and you start hiking up some of those trails and you're wondering about, oh man, I just need another bottle of water and I can make it the rest of the way and we'll be fine. You got to realize that there are people just like we were, or we are. They get burned out, they get worried, and that's how we get sometimes. We just don't understand how we're going to make it through. But God always comes through every time. He replies resupplies our needs every morning. He says, His grace is made new every morning. That's what we can hold on to. We can hold on to the fact that tomorrow the blessing is going to be there. Tomorrow we're going to get exactly what we need. Tomorrow we can get what we need. But today we can praise Him in the middle of it. In the beginning of 15, we saw where they started praising Him. They started singing. There's never a mention that I found in 16, and I may have looked over it, but there was never, I don't think it was in 16, that they praised Him in the sense of that. They didn't sit there and sing a song when the manna fell. At the end, they gave offering for it, but they didn't sing the praise like they did when they come out of the Red Sea. They didn't, they grabbed their tambourine and start praising Him the way they were when they left from Egypt. And sometimes we have to realize that God is still the same today, yesterday, and forever.
Yes, He is.
He's the same if you're in the good days, and He's the same if you're in the bad days. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we get that, and it goes on to talk about the water from the rock and how they wonder how they're going to get water again. They were always worried about themselves and selfishness of where they're at. And why are they still thirsty? And I can see that. I can understand that. But God always provided a way for them. He never left them alone. And I think about that sometimes, that we get in a place where it's hot and it's dry, but He never leaves us. And sometimes, and the old poem is, or the story is that in the footprints in the sand, sometimes He just picks us up and takes us along. Sometimes you just need to let God handle it. You just let Him carry you and let you know where you can go. Because sometimes we're so wore out with the mat that we can't make those decisions. We can't make those mental decisions that, Lord, I know You're going to do it, but I don't know how You're going to do it. And I was thinking, I heard a story a while back, and this talks about murmuring and complaining. I think it was 2012, maybe it was 13, or maybe even older than that. But there was a missionary in Russia, and they told him that you cannot preach the gospel in Russia. You can't do it. And so if we find you again, we're going to kill you. The guy kept preaching the gospel, bringing that eternal water and everlasting water, that life to these people, and he's preaching the gospel. They found him the next time and said, all right, we're sentencing you to death to a firing squad. And this guy, he's an American from what I understand, and he's standing in front of this firing squad. And he told them, they had an interpreter there, and some of y'all have been in over those countries, and Michigan, you have interpreters that tell what they say, Anyway, they were talking to him, and they said, is there any words that you would like to say to the preacher? And the preacher said, can I pray? And he said, yeah, go ahead. If you want to pray, say your words. And when I heard the story, I was thinking about, 3 Hebrew boys or Daniel Lions Den. You're thinking man, this is nowadays Bible character. This is pretty cool. But at that point he wasn't cool because he thought just get killed. But he said he started praying and he had an upper room experience in the Holy Ghost filled. And he started speaking in another tongue. And he was just, just praying. And I can just imagine this man's in the stress. He's crying. And you would too if you had all those guns pointed at you and you've lived your life. And I think this is how it was the Israelites. They had pushed and pushed and pushed. And now they're at the end point. And God Almighty will deliver. But he never complained. This guy never did. And he said, he got up from praying and he found himself and he said, I'm ready. He had a blindfold on. And he said, the interpreter said, you take your blindfold off. And he took it off. And the shooters were gone. Their guns were laid on the ground. And they were gone. And the interpreter told the man, he says, I thought you didn't speak Russian. He says, I don't. He said, well, you spoke fluent Russian and told them that they laid a hand on the man of God. They would be struck down. And the people left. I told you that story to tell you this. Is that it doesn't matter what situation or spiritual country that you're in, and you may not understand the language that's going around you right now, or understand the reason that you're in, but when God shows up to the scene, there's not going to be a firing squad. When God shows up to the scene, he'll carry you through no matter the situation. But this man didn't complain. He didn't murmur. He didn't say, God, I don't know why you put me in this position. I don't understand why I'm in this place where you're supposed to take my life. I don't understand that. Instead, in the midst of adversity, he praised God. At the midst of the situation that he was in, he praised him for what he was doing, for what he's going to do, and that he knew that if he died, he was going to go to heaven. He took it to a whole nother level, and I think that the Israelites would have realized they could take it to a whole nother level of how great God was. Maybe they wouldn't complain as much. Sometimes when we get in situations in life where we realize really how great is our God and how marvelous he is, we would stop complaining. We stop worrying about the little things. We stop worrying about the situations in life. And he never said it was going to be easy. He never promised that it was going to be easy and that we'd walk through and we'd be pinned with ribbons and that everyone would love us and that. But he said, if you take up your cross and you follow me. He didn't say, follow in a single file line and we'll go on this parade and everybody look at you and clap and be wonderful. But he said, take up your cross. He said, it's going to get hard. It's going to get heavy. But Jesus never complained about the walk to Calvary. He never complained about the whipping. He never complained that people spit in his face. He never complained about the situation he was in. If you remember in the garden when he's praying, he says, Lord, if it be your will, let this cup pass. And what God's will. He never complained about the fact to die for mine and your sins. So why do we come to a place that we complain that he's not going to take us through? Why do we worry? We're all human. We worry about situations. I get that. I worry about it too. But when we got God on our side, there's no need to worry. He can open up our Red Seas. He can provide water in the wilderness. He can bring manna from heaven. And this, he was showing you that, that's why I love the Israelite story, is that it doesn't matter if you're faced with a wall of Red Sea or the ocean of the Red Sea. He can make you a way to go through it, not around it. If you get thirsty in your walk, he can make the bitterness in your life turn to sweet. And when you get in a place where you get hungry and you thirst after him, he can bring manna and quail from heaven. That's the realness of God. If I believe in today, and some people worry that, and I've had these conversations with people, we get the mark of the beast and buy ourselves, stuff like how we're going to eat. If he provided manna for the Israelites, I'd be looking for them Texas Roadhouse rolls to fall from the sky and we could, eat them. But really, if we worry about those little things of how we're going to make it, and there was a preacher one time, and I probably told this story, he's worried about going to the chop block. And a long story short, he got around and prayed, and the Lord told him, felt like he told him, he says, don't worry about being killed at the chop block, just worry about getting there. So if I can tell anything to anybody today, is don't worry about what's going on, but just be worried about where we're going. That's what these Israelites lost focus of. And I understand that. In 40 years, you lose focus on where you're going to. I'm 26, and sometimes I lose focus on where I'm at in my life and wonder where I'm going to go. I can't imagine 40 years I picture them just walking in a circle, and they may not. The desert's huge. They probably went one side or the other. But they never saw Canaan after 40 years. 40 years of wondering, are we ever going to make it? Are Because it was a day in, day out experience that it was hot, it was dry, they walked everywhere, but Moses never gave up on God. And the fact that he knew that he would provide for his children. So instead of being like the Israelites, we can learn that through this, be grateful for what you do have. But don't be grateful for what you do have in the moment. But hold on to these things, because there's going to be times where it's going to be dark. There's going to be times where it's going to get dry. But God always provides a rock. He'll always provide a substance that comes bitter to sweet. And He will always make a Red Sea walkable. Sometimes, like I said, we don't know how we're going to get through it. And sometimes we don't. But God always shows up in the nick of time. So I hope you got something good out of the lesson. I know I always enjoy listening to the story of Israelites. But be encouraged that God doesn't forget about us. And He knows exactly what we need and the time that we need it.